He took a road he'd been avoiding for years. In the dark, a little girl pointed out where she lived: trash, cardboard, and absence. She was the daughter of the housekeeper who cleaned the mirrors in his mansion. That night, his reflection shattered, and a new destiny began. If this beautiful story of resilience and love has you hooked, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. And now, to continue the story. The full story. The encounter that changed everything. The fine March rain tapped against the windshield of the Mercedes as Ethan Miller drove through the deserted streets of New York City. It was almost 2 in the morning, and the 45-year-old businessman felt the weight of another exhausting business trip. Washington, D.C. had been a success. 3 more multi-million-dollar contracts for his construction company, but now all he wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and sleep for 12 straight hours. Traffic on the FDR Drive was at a complete standstill because of an accident. Ethan drummed, his fingers on the steering wheel, watching the red taillights stretch as far as the eye could see. After 20 minutes without moving an inch, he decided to get off the highway and find an alternate route. He knew this area well. He'd grown up here in the poor neighborhoods of the Bronx before making his fortune. The streets he now drove through were an even more run-down version of his childhood memories. Simple houses had given way to makeshift shacks. The asphalt was riddled with potholes and the smell of sewage seeped through the cracks of the air conditioning. Ethan sped up, anxious to get out of there as soon as possible. This wasn't his reality anymore, and he preferred to keep his distance from the ghosts of his past. That's when he saw her. A small figure appeared in front of his car, forcing him to slam on the brakes. Ethan rolled down the window, ready to yell at whoever was responsible for a child being on the street at this hour. But the words died in his throat when his eyes met the little girl's. She couldn't have been more than 6, her thin face covered in a layer of grime that couldn't hide her delicate features. Her brown hair was tangled, and her clothes, a floral dress that was already too small and worn-out rubber flip-flops, were soaked from the rain. But it was her eyes that disturbed him the most. Large, dark, and filled with a sadness no child should ever carry. "Mister," she said in a weak voice, "the lady needs help." Ethan looked around, searching for a responsible adult, but the street was empty. "What lady, kid? Where are your parents?" The girl pointed to a narrow alley between 2 abandoned buildings. Ethan followed her gaze and felt his stomach turn. Amidst the accumulated trash between pieces of old wood and wet cardboard was a structure that could barely be called a shelter. Plastic tarps tied with string tried to protect a tiny space where he could make out a figure lying down. "My mum's real sick," the girl continued, shivering from the cold. "She can't get up anymore. It's been 3 days. Ethan's heart raced. He should call social services, the police, someone who knew how to handle this situation. But there was something in the child's expression that stopped him from just driving away. A strange dignity. A strength that contrasted brutally with her fragile appearance. Against all his self-preservation instincts, Ethan parked the car and got out in the rain. His Italian leather shoes stepped into puddles of dirty water as he followed the girl into the alley. The smell was unbearable, a mix of mold, urine, and something he preferred not to identify. When he bent down to enter the makeshift shelter, Ethan had to use his phone as a flashlight. The light revealed a woman lying on an old stained mattress covered by a torn blanket. She was unconscious, breathing with difficulty, and Ethan noticed her skin had a sickly pallor. "Mum," the girl whispered, kneeling beside the woman. "I brought someone to help." Ethan shone the light on the woman's face and felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. Even emaciated by sickness and hunger, even with her dirty, disheveled hair, he recognized her immediately. Carmen Garcia, who had cleaned his house for 4 years. The quiet woman who arrived promptly at 7 in the morning, worked diligently until the end of the day, and always politely declined any conversation that went beyond professional matters. He paid her. Well, always on time, and thought that was enough. He had never once wondered how she lived outside the walls of his mansion. "My God," Ethan murmured, the reality crashing down on him like a physical weight. "Carmen?" The girl looked up at him, and Ethan saw a mix of surprise and fear in her expression. "You know my mom?" Ethan couldn't answer right away. His mind was racing, trying to process the situation. Carmen, who organized his expensive books and cleaned his marble floors, was living in subhuman conditions just a few miles away. The girl now watching him with suspicion was the daughter of the woman who knew his coffee preferences and never left a glass out of place. "She works for me," he finally said, his voice coming out hoarser than he intended. The rain intensified, and drops began to seep through the makeshift tarp roof. Ethan looked at Carmen, who remained unconscious, and then at her daughter, who was trying to shield her mother with her own small, fragile body. In that moment, watching that devastating scene, Ethan Miller felt something he hadn't experienced in years: shame. A deep, corrosive shame that burned in his chest, like acid. He who prided himself on his generosity for paying fair wages and giving Christmas bonuses was discovering that his most dedicated employee was literally dying of neglect just a few miles from his home. "We're getting out of here," Ethan said, taking off his suit jacket and covering Carmen with it. "Now." But when he turned to get the girl, she had retreated to the darkest corner of the shelter, clutching a dirty rag doll and looking at him with pure terror. "No," the girl whispered, pressing her back against the damp wall of the shelter. "We're not." "Leaving my mom?" Ethan raised his hands slowly, trying to seem less threatening. "We're not leaving her. I'm taking you both to a safe place where your mom can get medical help." "Liar," the girl shot back, clutching the rag doll even tighter. "Everyone lies. The men always take the mums away and the kids are left alone. I've seen it happen." Ethan's heart ached. How many times had this child witnessed forced separations? How many adults had broken promises to her? He knelt in the mud, bringing himself down to her level. "What's your name?" She hesitated for a long moment. "Isabella." "Isabella, I promise I won't separate you. Your mom is very sick and needs doctors, medicine, a clean bed. If we stay here, she could get even worse." Isabella looked at Carmen, whose breathing was becoming more labored. "She said you're rich, that you live in a big house with a pool." "That's true. So why do you want to help us now? Why didn't you help before?" The question cut Ethan like a knife. There was no answer that could justify his willful blindness. "Because I was wrong, very wrong, and now I want to fix it." Thunder rumbled overhead, and the rain began to fall even harder. The tarp roof partially gave way, allowing icy water to stream onto the mattress where Carmen lay. "Mom!" Isabella cried, rushing to shield her mother from the cold water. Ethan didn't hesitate any longer. He lifted Carmen into his arms, surprised by how much weight she had lost. The body he remembered as strong and hard-working now felt like it was made of twigs. "Isabella, grab your things, quickly." The girl looked around the miserable shelter. Her things consisted only of the rag doll, a change of clothes, even more worn than what she had on, and a small plastic bag with a few stale crackers. Ethan carried Carmen to the car, followed by Isabella, who walked with hesitant steps. The light-colored leather of the Mercedes seats was soon stained with the dirty water from their clothes, but Ethan didn't even notice. His mind was focused on getting to the hospital as fast as possible. "Mount Sinai Hospital," he said to the GPS, starting the car. "No," Isabella spoke from the back seat, where she held her mother's cold hand. "A public hospital. My mom doesn't have insurance. Or money. Don't worry about that right now." "You don't understand." The girl's voice was filled with a bitterness that shouldn't exist in someone so young. "At the expensive hospital, they ask questions. They want papers. And when they find out we're poor, they send us away." Ethan looked in the rearview mirror and saw Isabella stroking Carmen's face with a tenderness that was painful to watch. "How many times did you try to get medical help?" "A lot. My mom started getting sick 3 months ago. First it was just a cough. Then the fever came, the medicine from the pharmacy didn't help, and she couldn't afford the expensive kind." Isabella spoke with the precision of someone who had memorized every detail of her mother's decline. "We went to the community clinic 5 times. They always told us to come back another day, that the doctor wasn't in, that they were out of appointments." Ethan felt anger rising in his chest, not at the girl or Carmen, but at a system that allowed people to die for lack of basic care while he spent fortunes on expensive wines. At the private hospital, they said they couldn't even do a consultation without a credit card, Isabella continued. My mom cried so much that day. She kept saying she was a good person, that she worked hard, that she didn't deserve this. Carmen never told me she was sick. Of course not. Isabella laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. She was terrified of losing her job. She said people like us can't cause trouble, that we have to be grateful for what we get and never complain. Ethan swallowed hard. How many times had he praised Carmen for being discreet and no fuss? How many times had he interpreted her silence as efficiency when it was actually desperation? They reached Mount Sinai in 15 minutes. Ethan pulled up to the emergency entrance and ran inside. I need a gurney, now. The nurses reacted immediately, recognizing the urgency in the well-dressed man's voice. Within seconds, Carmen was being wheeled into an emergency room, hooked up to monitors, and put on an IV. Ethan tried to follow, but was stopped by a nurse. Sir, you need to fill out the admission forms. What's the patient's insurance? She doesn't have any. I'll pay for everything. The nurse looked surprised but accepted the information. And your relationship to the patient? Ethan hesitated. What was his relationship with Carmen, really? Employer? Acquaintance? She's... He looked at Isabella, who was watching him intently. She's family. After filling out the forms with information he had to invent, he didn't even know Carmen's full last name, Ethan went back to where Isabella was waiting in the waiting room. The girl was sitting in a chair that was much too big for her, swinging her legs that didn't reach the floor. The doctor said she's very weak, Ethan informed her, sitting down beside her. She has pneumonia, severe anemia, and she's dehydrated, but they're going to take care of her. Isabella nodded silently, but Ethan noticed she was clutching the rag doll so tightly her knuckles were white. Are you hungry? He asked. Always, Isabella answered with devastating honesty. Ethan took her to the hospital cafeteria and bought sandwiches, juice, fruit. He watched, fascinated and horrified, as the girl devoured the food as if she didn't know when her next meal would be. She probably didn't. Isabella, how long have you been living in that place? The girl finished chewing before she answered. 2 months. Before that, we lived in a little room in the back of Miss Martha's house. But when my mom started missing work because she was sick, Miss Martha said she couldn't feel sorry for us anymore, that she had her own family to take care of. And your father? Isabella's face shut down. I don't have a father. My mom always said he left when he found out she was pregnant, that men don't like responsibility. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. Isabella spoke about abandonment and rejection with the casualness of someone discussing the weather. For her, being discarded by adults was a normal part of life. Why didn't your mum come to me when she started having problems? Isabella looked at him as if he'd asked a stupid question. Because you live in a different world. People like us don't exist for people like you. My mom always said that. But I always treated your mom well. I paid on time, gave her a Christmas bonus, paid vacation. Did you know her name before today? Ethan opened his mouth to answer and realized he couldn't. Carmen Garcia. He had only learned her last name when he filled out the hospital form. In 4 years of work, she had always just been Carmen to him. Did you know where she lived? He didn't. Did you know she had a daughter? He had no idea. Did you know she was sick? He never asked why she had missed a few days last month. Isabella continued eating in silence, and Ethan felt the weight of every unasked question, of every indifference disguised as politeness. He had created a careful distance between himself and his staff, convincing himself he was being respectful when he was actually being a coward. A doctor approached them. Family of Carmen. Garcia? Ethan stood up immediately. How is she? Stable but critical. The pneumonia is advanced and she's severely malnourished. She'll need to be hospitalized for at least 2 weeks, maybe more. And she's going to be okay? The doctor hesitated. We'll do everything we can, but I won't lie. She was brought in very late. If she had come a few days ago... Ethan looked at Isabella, who had stopped eating and was watching the conversation with an intensity that made his heart ache. Doctor, the girl asked in a small voice. "Is my mom going to die?" The doctor looked at Isabella with a careful expression, clearly weighing his words. "We're going to do everything we can for your mum. She's a strong woman." It was a non-answer, and everyone in the hallway knew it. Isabella looked down, and Ethan saw her small hands tremble as she held the rag doll. "Doctor, can I speak with you privately?" Ethan asked. They moved a few feet away, but Isabella continued to watch every movement, every facial expression, as if she could decipher her fate through signs. "The situation is really serious," the doctor whispered. "The malnutrition has severely compromised her immune system. The pneumonia has spread to both lungs, and there are signs her heart is under strain. Honestly, if she survives the next 48 hours, it will be a miracle." Ethan felt the floor shift beneath his feet. "But she'll get all the necessary care, right? Money is no object." "Of course. We've already moved her to the ICU. She's on the best equipment, but you need to understand that her body is extremely weak. How long has she gone without proper nutrition?" "I don't know." The admission burned in Ethan's throat. "I don't know anything about her life." The doctor frowned. "You said you were family." Ethan glanced at Isabella, who was pretending not to pay attention but was clearly hanging on every word. "It's complicated." "Well, I'll need her medical information, history of illnesses, medications, allergies, and we'll also need the girl's documents for social services in case... In case of what?" "In case the mother doesn't make it. The child will need psychological and social support. She can't be left alone." Ethan felt a cold knot in his stomach. The possibility of Carmen not surviving had become real in that brightly lit hospital corridor, and with it came a responsibility he didn't know if he was prepared to take on. He returned to where Isabella was waiting. The girl had finished eating and was now just holding the doll, staring at the ICU doors as if she could see through them. "Isabella, I need to ask you some things about your mum, to help the doctors." She nodded but didn't look away from the doors. "Does she have any illnesses? Take any medicine?" "My mum was never sick until now. She always said poor people can't afford to get sick." Isabella paused. "But sometimes she would cough, a lot at night. And sometimes I'd wake up and she'd be crying, holding her chest." "How long has this been happening?" "About 6 months. But she said it was just from being tired from work, that she worked too hard." Ethan swallowed hard. 6 months. Carmen had worked sick in his house for 6 months, cleaning his floors while she was suffocating, organizing his books while her body deteriorated. "Isabella, do you have a birth certificate? Any documents?" The girl finally looked at him, and there was fear in her eyes. "Why do you need my papers? Are you going to send me to an orphanage?" "No, never. I just need them for the hospital. My mum kept our papers in a folder, but we lost everything when we got kicked out of Miss Martha's house." Isabella hesitated. "Actually, Miss Martha took the folder and said she'd keep it for us. But when we went back to get it, she said she'd thrown it away." "Why would she do that?" "Because my mum owed 3 months' rent for the little room. Miss Martha said that without our papers, we'd be stuck where we were forever. That nobody would help us without papers." Ethan felt anger growing in his chest. "Who is this Miss Martha?" "A lady who lived near your neighborhood. My mum cleaned her house too to make extra money." Isabella lowered her voice. "But Miss Martha paid very little. She said she was doing charity, that my mum should be grateful. And you were left with no documents at all." "My mum tried to get new copies, but they wouldn't accept her application without proof of residence. And without documents, we couldn't rent anything. That's how we ended up on the street." Ethan was beginning to understand the complexity of the trap Carmen had fallen into. Without documents, she couldn't access basic services. Without a fixed address, she couldn't get new documents. Without documents, she couldn't get a formal job. It was a vicious cycle that pushed people into social invisibility. "Where is this Miss Martha's house?" Isabella gave him the address, and Ethan typed it into his phone. "Why do you want to know?" "I'm going to get your documents back." "She won't give them back. She said she threw them away." "We'll see." Ethan's voice had taken on a tone Isabella didn't recognize. Cold, determined. the tone he used in business when someone tried to cheat him. A nurse approached. "Mr. Miller, the patient Carmen Garcia is awake. She's asking for her daughter." Isabella jumped out of her chair, but Ethan gently held her back. "Easy. We'll see her together." The ICU was a frightening environment for a child. Machines beeped constantly, lights flashed, and there was a distinct smell of disinfectant and medicine. Carmen was lying in a bed surrounded by equipment, with an oxygen mask on her face and several tubes connected to her body. But her eyes were open, and when she saw Isabella, they tried to smile despite the mask. "Mom!" Isabella ran to the bed but stopped before touching her, afraid of hurting her. Carmen raised a weak hand, and Isabella held it carefully. The woman's eyes moved to Ethan, and he saw recognition, surprise, and then deep shame. "Carmen," Ethan said softly, approaching the bed. "How are you feeling?" Carmen tried to speak, but the mask muffled her words. Ethan called the nurse, who adjusted the mask so she could whisper. "Mr. Miller, I'm sorry." Her voice was just a breath. "I didn't want you to know." "Carmen, don't talk about being sorry. I'm the one who should be sorry." Tears streamed from Carmen's eyes. "Isabella, take care of Isabella. You're going to be fine," Ethan interrupted, though he wasn't sure of it. "And no matter what happens, Isabella will not be alone." Carmen squeezed her daughter's hand and then looked at Ethan with desperate intensity. "Promise?" "I promise." The conversation was cut short by one of the machines, which began to beep more rapidly. Carmen closed her eyes and her breathing became labored. "You'll have to leave," the nurse said, checking the monitors. "She needs to rest." In the hallway, Isabella threw herself into a chair and began to cry silently. These were tears she had been holding back for months, maybe years. Ethan sat beside her, not knowing what to say. "She's going to die," Isabella whispered between sobs. "Just like everyone I love." "Who else did you lose?" "My grandma. She took care of me when my mum worked, but she got sick and couldn't afford a doctor either." Isabella wiped her nose on her sleeve. "My mum said that when you're poor, the people you love always leave early." Ethan felt like he'd been punched. "Isabella, that's not true." "Yes, it is. You're rich and you're still here. My mom is poor and she's dying." The brutal logic of a 6-year-old who had learned that love and loss were inseparable. Ethan didn't know how to argue against a truth that, in Isabella's limited experience, had proven itself correct time and again. His cell phone rang. It was his personal assistant, probably worried about his disappearance. "Robert." "Mr. Miller, thank God. Where are you? You have the meeting with the Japanese investors in 2 hours and you've vanished." Ethan looked at Isabella, who was watching every word of the conversation, as if her life depended on it. "Robert, cancel all my meetings for this week." "What do you mean cancel?" "Mr. Miller, there are millions of dollars on the line." "Cancel everything. And I want you to find information on a woman named Martha Sanchez." Ethan gave him the address Isabella had provided. "I want to know everything about her. Properties, income, history, everything." "Sir, what's going on?" "I'll explain later. And Robert, hire the best lawyers we know. I'm going to need them." Ethan hung up and saw that Isabella was watching, him with a different expression. For the first time there was a tiny spark of something that might be hope in her eyes. "Are you really going after Ms. Martha?" "I am, and I'm going to get your documents back." "What if she lied? What if she really threw them away?" Ethan smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who had found its prey. "Then she's going to get me new copies, and she's going to pay for everything she did to you." Just then, a nurse ran toward the ICU, followed by 2 doctors. Alarms began to sound, and Ethan felt his heart stop when he realized they were coming from the direction of Carmen's room. Isabella shot up from her chair like a rocket, running toward the ICU before Ethan could stop her. He ran after her, but the girl was fast and desperate. By the time he caught up, she was already at the ICU door, watching through the glass a scene no child should ever witness. Carmen was convulsing. Her small body thrashed on the bed as 3 doctors worked frantically around her, administering medication and adjusting equipment. The Machines emitted sharp, constant sounds, creating a desperate symphony of alarms. "Mom!" Isabella screamed, pounding the glass with her small fists. "Mom!" Ethan scooped her into his arms, pulling her away from the door. She struggled against him, crying hysterically. "Let me go, she needs me. I always take care of her when she's sick. Isabella, the doctors are taking care of her now. You can't go in." "You don't understand," the girl screamed through her tears. "When she gets bad, I sing the song my grandma taught me. It always works, always." Ethan's heart broke. A 6-year-old child believed her song could save her dying mother. He carried her to a chair farther away, but Isabella kept staring at the ICU doors. "What song is that?" he asked, trying to distract her. "My grandma used to sing it when I had nightmares. She said it scared the monsters away," Isabella sobbed. "My mom got sick after Grandma went away, so I started singing it for her and she always got better." Ethan realized that the girl had, at some point, become her own mother's caregiver, a cruel reversal of roles that no child should ever have to live through. 15 minutes passed that felt like hours. Finally, the frantic movement in the ICU subsided. One of the doctors came out, looking exhausted. "How is she?" Ethan asked immediately. "We've stabilized her for now. It was a cardiac arrest, but she responded well to resuscitation. However," the doctor paused, looking at Isabella, "her heart is very weak. Even if she gets over the pneumonia, she'll need constant care, maybe surgery. Whatever she needs, money is no object. Mr. Miller, I need to be honest. Even with all available resources, I don't know if her body can take much. More, she starved for a long time, which has weakened all of her systems." Isabella had stopped crying and was now looking at the doctor with a blank expression that was even more frightening than her earlier despair. "Doctor," she said in a small but firm voice, "can I see her?" The doctor hesitated. "She's unconscious. Please, just for a minute." Ethan nodded at the doctor. "Let her say goodbye." The words slipped out of his mouth before he could think, and he immediately regretted them. Isabella looked at him with wide eyes. "Goodbye? You think she's going to—" "No." Ethan knelt down to her level. "I'm sorry, that's not what I meant. But if you want to see her, even if she's sleeping, I understand." They entered the ICU silently. Carmen looked even smaller connected to all the equipment. Her face was as pale as wax, and her breathing was assisted by machines. Isabella approached the bed and took her mother's hand. Then, in a clear, sweet voice, she began to sing a simple melody. It was a lullaby about stars that protected children through the night. To everyone's surprise in the room, Carmen's heart rate stabilized as Isabella sang. It wasn't a medical miracle, but there was something powerful in that moment between mother and daughter. When the song ended, Carmen's eyes slowly opened. Her hand gave Isabella's a faint squeeze. "My girl," she whispered with difficulty, always sang so beautifully. "Mum, you're going to get better. The doctor said you're going to get better." Carmen looked past Isabella to Ethan. "Mr. Miller." "I'm here, Carmen. You need to know—" Carmen breathed with difficulty. "About Isabella. She's special, so smart. She could read before she even went to school." "Carmen, don't strain yourself." "No," she insisted. "I have to tell you. She speaks English, learned on her own, watching TV, and she draws beautiful things. I keep them under the mattress." Ethan looked at Isabella, who blushed. The girl had hidden talents during their earlier conversation. "Is that true, Isabella? You speak English?" Isabella hesitated, then murmured a few words in perfect English. "I learned from TV. My mom always said I was too smart for my own good." Ethan was shocked. A 6-year-old girl who had barely attended school regularly spoke fluent English. "Carmen," he said softly, "I promise I will take care of everything she needs. Education, opportunities, everything. She likes books, always asked for me to buy them, but—" Carmen couldn't finish the sentence. "She'll have all the books she wants," Ethan promised. Carmen smiled faintly and closed her eyes. The monitors showed she had drifted back into a medicated sleep, but her vital signs remained stable. In the hallway, Ethan processed the revelations. Isabella wasn't just a traumatized child who needed help. She was brilliant, talented, full of potential that was being wasted by her situation. "Why didn't you tell me you spoke English?" he asked. "Because rich people get mad when poor people know things they know," Isabella answered with brutal honesty. "My mum told me to never show I was smart because bosses don't like it when their employees are too smart." Ethan felt another wave of shame. "Isabella, being smart is always a good thing. Never hide that." "Even if I'm poor?" "Especially because you're poor. Intelligence can change your life." His cell phone rang. It was Robert again. "Mr. Miller, I got the information on Martha Sanchez. You're not going to believe what I found." "Tell me." "She's had a registered cleaning company for 10 years, employs over 50 women, but all of them are off the books. And she has properties worth over $2 million. Ethan felt anger boil in his veins. "Go on." "She's known for renting rooms to employees, but she charges abusive rates and confiscates their documents as collateral. She's been reported 3 times for labor trafficking but was never punished." "And the lawyers?" "They're already preparing the paperwork. With your authorization, we can file a civil suit this afternoon." Ethan looked at Isabella, who was distractedly playing with the rag doll. "File it. And, Robert, I want you to also investigate other women who might be in the same situation. If this Martha did this to Carmen, she's certainly done it to others." "Understood." "Oh, and Mr. Miller, the press is starting to call. Your absence at the meeting with the Japanese investors has drawn attention. What should I tell them?" Ethan thought for a moment. His company was negotiating multi-million-dollar deals, but none of that mattered compared to the child sitting next to him. "Tell them I had a family emergency, and it's the truth." After hanging up, Ethan sat next to Isabella. "You know what? I'm going to sue Ms. Martha. She's going to return your documents and pay for everything she did. What if she doesn't have the papers anymore? Then she'll pay to get new ones, and she'll compensate you financially for what you've been through." Isabella looked at him with an expression far too serious for her age. "Why are you doing this? Rich people don't care about people like us." Ethan took a deep breath. How could he explain to a child that he had spent his entire life turning a blind eye to the suffering around him until that suffering literally knocked on his door? "Because I learned something today," he said finally. "I learned that being rich means nothing if you don't use it to help those who need it. And I learned that your mother is one of the most hard-working and dignified people I know. She always said she worked for good people. Your mother is good. I'm the one who wasn't good enough for her." Just then, an elegant woman approached them in the hallway. Ethan recognized her immediately. It was Patricia, his ex-wife, accompanied by a man in a suit he didn't know. "Ethan!" Patricia looked shocked to see him there. "What are you doing here? Robert said you cancelled important meetings." Ethan stood up, instinctively placing himself between Patricia and Isabella. "It's personal, Patricia." Patricia glanced at Isabella with a look of barely concealed disdain. "Who is this child? Why is she so dirty?" "That's none of your business." "Of course it is." The man beside Patricia spoke for the first time. "I'm Dr. Fernandez, Mrs. Miller's attorney. If you're involved in some irregular situation with a minor, it could affect the division of assets in the divorce." Ethan's blood ran cold. He and Patricia had been in the process of divorcing for 2 years, and the settlement still hadn't been finalized. If she used Isabella against him, "There's nothing irregular here." "Ethan," Patricia said with false concern, "you disappeared for hours. You're with a street kid. You cancelled multi-million-dollar commitments. You're clearly not in a condition to make important decisions." Ethan realized he was being cornered. Patricia had found a way to use his vulnerability against him, and Isabella's presence could compromise everything, not just his assets, but his ability to help Carmen and her daughter. In that critical moment, Isabella tugged on his sleeve and whispered, "She's mean like Ms. Martha, isn't she?" Ethan looked at Isabella, who was watching him with that sharp perception she had developed to survive. The girl had immediately identified the threat Patricia posed, even without fully understanding the context. "Patricia, you need to leave. Now." Ethan's voice was low but charged with authority. "I'm not going anywhere until I understand what's happening." Patricia crossed her arms, adopting the belligerent posture he knew so well. "Ethan, you vanished for hours, left Japanese investors waiting, and now you're here with an obviously neglected child. This is not the behavior of someone in their right mind." Dr. Fernandez opened a briefcase. "Mr. Miller, I have documents here that could call into question your ability to manage your own assets. If you're making impulsive choices that harm your business, be careful what you say, Doctor." Ethan stepped closer to the lawyer. "This child is the daughter of my employee who is in this hospital, fighting for her life. If that's impulsiveness to you, then you're the ones with serious character flaws." Isabella hid behind Ethan, clearly frightened by the tension in the air. She whispered, "Are they going to take me away?" The innocent question cut Ethan like a knife. He knelt down to her level, completely ignoring Patricia and the lawyer. "No one is going to take you from me. I promised your mother I would take care of you, and I'm going to keep that promise." "See?" Patricia turned to her lawyer. "He's clearly emotionally involved in an inappropriate way, making promises he can't keep, making decisions based on impulse." Ethan stood up slowly, and Patricia took a step back when she saw the look on his face. "Inappropriate?" His voice was dangerously calm. "You know what's inappropriate, Patricia? A woman who spent $300,000 on handbags last year, while the employee who cleaned our house was starving. A person who never once asked the full name of the woman who worked in our home for 4 years. I had no obligation to—" "Yes, you did," Ethan exploded. "We all did. And it's exactly that mentality that allowed Carmen to nearly die while we were arguing over the division of expensive assets." The hospital corridor fell silent. Other patients and visitors were staring at the argument, and Ethan realized he was losing control. Dr. Fernandez seized the opportunity. "Mr. Miller, you are clearly agitated. I suggest you seek psychological help before making any decisions related to this child. The only thing I need is for you to get out of here and let me take care of what really matters." Just then, a nurse came running. "Mr. Miller, the patient, Carmen Garcia, had another crisis. The doctor needs to speak with you urgently." Ethan felt the world crumble. He scooped Isabella into his arms and ran toward the ICU, leaving Patricia and her lawyer behind. Outside the ICU, Dr. Stevens, the cardiologist, was waiting with a grave expression. "Mr. Miller, Carmen had a second cardiac arrest. We were able to resuscitate her again, but her heart is failing. I need to be direct. Without a transplant, she doesn't have much time." Isabella in Ethan's arms began to tremble. "What's a transplant?" Ethan exchanged a meaningful look with the doctor. "It's when doctors put a new heart in a person. Like a new heart. From someone who doesn't need it anymore," Ethan explained with difficulty. Isabella processed the information with the precocious intelligence that had so impressed Ethan. "Someone who died. Yes. So someone has to die for my mom to live?" The brutal question from a 6-year-old left all the adults speechless. Dr. Stevens recovered first. "Isabella, your name is Isabella, right? When someone passes away, sometimes they leave parts of their body to help other people. It's like a very special gift. But what if nobody wants to give the gift?" Ethan felt tears burn his eyes. "Then we'll do everything we can to help your mom's heart get better on its own." "Mr. Miller," Dr. Stevens said quietly, "I need you to understand, even if she gets on the transplant list, the chances are slim. Her blood type is rare, and her overall health is severely compromised." Patricia had quietly approached and overheard the last part of the conversation. "Ethan, you can't take responsibility for this. An orphaned child, expensive treatments that might not work. You're putting yourself in an impossible situation." Ethan turned to her with controlled fury. "You know the difference between you and me, Patricia? When I see someone suffering, my instinct is to help. Yours is to calculate the cost. I'm being realistic. This woman could die anyway, and you'll be left responsible for a child that isn't yours with no preparation, while your own business falls apart." Isabella was listening to everything, and Ethan saw the moment she reached the obvious conclusion. Patricia didn't want him to help her. "She doesn't want you to take care of me," Isabella said quietly. "That's not it, sweetie." Patricia tried to soften her tone. "It's just that you're Mr. Miller has a lot of responsibilities and taking care of you could be very difficult for him. Because I'm poor? The simple, direct question left Patricia speechless for a moment. It's not about money, it's about preparation. Raising a child is very complicated. More complicated than her taking care of her sick mother while living on the street, Ethan asked sarcastically. Dr. Fernandez intervened. Mr. Miller, legally speaking, you have no official relationship with this child. If something happens to the mother, she will be referred to social services until they find next of kin. And if there are no relatives, an orphanage or foster care. Ethan looked at Isabella, who had shrunk into his arms at the word orphanage. No, he said firmly, that's not going to happen. Ethan, Patricia sighed, you can't just decide to adopt a child on an impulse. There are processes, investigations, psychological evaluations. Then let's start now. Dr. Fernandez laughed. Mr. Miller, the adoption process can take years, and considering your unstable marital situation, ongoing divorce, lack of experience with children— My unstable marital situation? Ethan repeated slowly. Patricia, are you really using an orphaned child as a weapon against me? We're not the ones doing that, she answered defensively. You're the one putting yourself in a vulnerable position. Just then, Robert came running down the hall holding a thick folder. Mr. Miller, I got explosive information on Martha Sanchez. She didn't just confiscate Carmen's documents, she's done it to over 20 women in the last 5 years. Ethan gently set Isabella down. Go on. It's a whole scheme. She offers housing to domestic workers, then charges abusive rent, confiscates documents as collateral, and when they can't pay, she kicks them out without returning anything. Some of these women have been missing for months. Patricia and Dr. Fernandez exchanged worried glances. There's more, Robert continued. We discovered she has connections to a network of domestic worker agencies that operate illegally. They recruit vulnerable women from out of state, promise them jobs and housing, then exploit them. Ethan felt a rage building that went far beyond his personal situation. Robert, I want you to get every lawyer we have on this. We're going to dismantle this entire operation. Ethan, Patricia tried to interrupt, this will cost a fortune and take all your time. You have a company to run. My company can wait, these women can't. Dr. Fernandez whispered something to Patricia, who nodded. Ethan, she said, adopting a more conciliatory tone, if you really want to help this child, you need to think about what's best for her. You're going through an emotionally unstable time, making drastic decisions. Maybe it's better to let the professionals handle the situation. What professionals? The same ones who let Carmen nearly die on the street? The same ones who allowed Martha Sanchez to exploit dozens of women? Isabella tugged on Ethan's sleeve. Can I ask something? Everyone stopped arguing and looked at her. If she goes away, will I have to live with strangers who don't want me? The silence that followed was deafening. Because, Isabella continued with that brutal honesty, I'd rather stay on the street. On the street, at least, nobody pretends to care about me. It was at that moment that a new figure appeared in the hallway, a middle-aged, well-dressed woman carrying an official-looking binder. Mr. Ethan Miller, she asked. I'm Miss Marissa Cole from Child Protective Services. We received an anonymous tip about a child in an irregular situation at this hospital. Ethan looked at Patricia and Dr. Fernandez and saw the barely concealed satisfaction on their faces. They had called CPS. Ethan's blood ran cold when he saw the satisfied look on Patricia's face. She had played the lowest card possible, using a vulnerable child as a pawn in her personal war against him. Ms. Cole, Ethan approached the social worker, keeping his voice calm. There's nothing irregular here. Isabella is the daughter of an employee of mine who is hospitalized in critical condition. I'm taking care of her temporarily. I see. The woman observed Isabella with professional attention, noting the dirty clothes and the child's general state. And where was the minor living before her mother's hospitalization? Ethan hesitated. He couldn't lie, but the truth could be used against him. They were in a vulnerable housing situation, he said carefully. Living on the street, Isabella corrected with her brutal honesty. In a shelter made of tarps and cardboard. For 2 months. Ms. Cole jotted everything down on her clipboard. And why didn't you seek out social services? Because they always sent us away, Isabella answered before Ethan could intervene. They said we had to wait, that there were no openings, to come back another day. Isabella, Ethan tried to interject, but the girl continued. My mom was really scared to ask for help. She said if they found out we lived on the street, they'd take me away from her. Ms. Cole frowned. Mr. Miller, what exactly is your legal relationship with this child? Patricia stepped forward. None. He has no legal or familial ties to her, and he's making impulsive decisions that could harm both his business and the child's well-being. That's not true, Ethan protested. I'm simply helping a loyal employee and her daughter in an emergency situation. Helping? Dr. Fernandez opened his briefcase. Mr. Miller, in the last 24 hours you've cancelled multi-million-dollar meetings, disappeared without telling anyone, and are acting completely irrationally. You are clearly not in a condition to make decisions about the care of a minor. Ms. Cole watched the argument with growing interest. Mr. Miller, I understand your good intentions, but I need to assess if this is truly the best situation for the child. Where did she sleep last night? Ethan realized the trap. We haven't gotten to that point yet. Carmen was admitted in the middle of the night, and we've been here at the hospital ever since. So the child has nowhere to sleep tonight. She'll stay with me, obviously. Mr. Miller, Ms. Cole adopted an official tone. Without a court order or a designated next of kin, you can't simply take a child to your home. It's CPS protocol to ensure that minors in vulnerable situations are placed in a safe and appropriate environment. Isabella, who had followed the entire conversation intently, moved closer to Ethan and took his hand. They're going to take me, aren't they? I won't let that happen. Mr. Miller, Ms. Cole said gently, I understand you've developed a bond with the child, but we have procedures to follow. Isabella needs to be evaluated by psychologists, social workers, and temporarily placed in a foster home until the situation is resolved. No, Isabella said firmly. I don't want to go with you. I want to stay with Mr. Miller. Sweetie, Ms. Cole knelt, down to the girls' level. I know this is scary, but there are very good families who take care of children like you temporarily. They'll give you food, clean clothes, a safe place to sleep. Like Miss Martha? Isabella asked sarcastically. She promised to take care of us too. Ethan saw an opportunity. Ms. Cole, you need to know there's much more to this story. Martha Sanchez, who exploited Carmen and other women, is part of a larger human trafficking scheme for domestic labor. Robert stepped forward, opening his folder. Ms. Cole, we have documentation of over 20 similar cases. Vulnerable women who were exploited had their documents confiscated and were then abandoned to fend for themselves. This is very serious, the social worker admitted, but it doesn't change the fact that this child needs appropriate care right now. Just then a nurse rushed out of the ICU. Mr. Miller, Carmen Garcia is awake and asking to see her daughter. She's very agitated. Ethan looked at Ms. Cole. Can I take Isabella to see her mother? Just for a few minutes. Of course, but I'll be accompanying you. They entered the ICU together. Carmen was conscious but clearly weak. When she saw Isabella, she tried to smile, but there was desperation in her eyes. My girl, she whispered. Are they trying to take you from me? Mummy, there's a lady here who wants to put me in a house with strangers. Carmen looked at Ms. Cole with an intensity that startled everyone in the room. Please, don't separate my daughter from me. She's all I have. Mrs. Garcia, Ms. Cole said gently, I understand your concern, but Isabella needs care that you can't provide in your current state. Mr. Miller will take care of her. He promised. Mrs. Garcia, Mr. Miller has no legal authority to be responsible for your daughter. Carmen tried to sit up in bed, setting off the alarms. Then I give him authority. I choose who takes care of my daughter. Mom, calm down. Isabella held her hand. Don't push yourself. Dr. Stevens rushed in. What's going on in here? The patient can't be agitated. Doctor, Carmen struggled to speak, I need to sign papers, to give authorization, for Mr. Miller to take care of Isabella. Mrs. Garcia, Ms. Cole explained, Even if you give authorization, there are legal procedures to follow. A social study, psychological evaluation, background checks. How long does that take? Ethan asked. Several weeks, maybe months. Carmen began to cry silently. I don't have weeks. The doctor said, my heart. Dr. Stevens shot a meaningful look at Ethan. Carmen was right. She didn't have much time. Ms. Cole, Ethan said firmly, is there any way to expedite this process? Any emergency measure? Well, in exceptional cases, with a court order, we can grant temporary custody. But a judge would need to be convinced it's in the child's best interest. And what would that require? A psychological evaluation of you, verification of your financial and housing conditions, an interview with Isabella, a medical opinion on the mother's condition, Patricia interjected, which is impossible considering Ethan is in a contentious divorce with assets still undivided and demonstrating unstable behavior. Ethan turned to her with controlled fury. Patricia, stop, now. I won't stop. You're destroying your own life over an emotional impulse. And you're destroying a child's life for revenge. Ethan's shout echoed through the ICU, silencing everyone. Even the medical equipment seemed to quiet down. Carmen gripped Ethan's hand with surprising strength for someone in her condition. Mr. Miller, if something happens to me, please don't let her go to an orphanage. I promise, Carmen, I'll find a way. Ms. Cole sighed. Mr. Miller, I understand your good intentions, but I have to follow protocol. Isabella will need to come with me today. I can assure you she will be placed with a good temporary foster family. No, Isabella screamed, running to Ethan and clinging to him. I don't want to go. Please don't make me. Sweetie, Ms. Cole tried to approach, but Isabella hid behind Ethan. You're just like the other adults. You promise good things and then you hurt people. Carmen, seeing her daughter's desperation, made a superhuman effort to sit up in bed. Ms. Cole, please, let her stay just for tonight, so I can say goodbye, if it comes to that. The social worker hesitated, clearly moved by the situation. One night, Carmen repeated. Tomorrow, we'll do everything the right way. But let my girl sleep near her mother. One last time. Dr. Stevens checked Carmen's monitors, worried about her agitation. She really needs to rest. Robert approached Ethan and whispered, Mr. Miller, I just got an urgent call. We discovered something about Martha Sanchez that changes everything. She didn't act alone. There are other people involved, powerful people. Ethan looked at Isabella, who was still clinging to him in desperation, then at Carmen in the hospital bed, then at Patricia, who was watching him with malicious satisfaction. Who? He asked quietly. I can't say here, but Mr. Miller, one of the people involved is in this hallway right now. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as Robert glanced discreetly in the direction of Dr. Fernandez, Patricia's lawyer. Ethan's blood ran cold as he grasped the implications of what Robert was suggesting. Dr. Fernandez, Patricia's lawyer, was involved in the exploitation scheme that had destroyed the lives of Carmen and dozens of other women. Are you sure? Ethan whispered, keeping his face neutral so as not to alert the lawyer. Robert nodded discreetly. They just confirmed it. He's the lawyer who legalizes Martha Sanchez's fraudulent contracts. He documents the abusive rental agreements, the confiscation of documents, all under a veneer of legality. Ethan looked at Dr. Fernandez, who was talking animatedly with Patricia, probably boasting about how he'd called CPS to complicate the situation. Suddenly, it all made sense. Patricia hadn't just hired a lawyer, she had allied herself with someone who profited from the suffering of people like Carmen. Ms. Cole, Ethan approached the social worker. I need a few minutes to organize things if possible. Can Isabella stay here while I handle some urgent matters? Mr. Miller, I understand this is a difficult situation, but 1 hour, Ethan insisted. I just need 1 hour to make some important calls. After that, if you still think it's necessary, Isabella can go with you. Carmen, still in bed, held her daughter's hand. 1 hour, please, she whispered to Miss Cole, so I can explain to her how things will be. The social worker hesitated, clearly moved. 1 hour, but I'll be in the hallway and Isabella cannot leave the hospital. Thank you. Ethan turned to Robert. I need everything you have on Dr. Fernandez. Now. As Robert opened his folder, Patricia approached with a satisfied smile. Ethan, I hope you finally understand that you're making the wrong choices. When all this confusion is over, maybe we can talk about an amicable division of assets. Patricia, Ethan said calmly, how long have you known Dr. Fernandez? A few weeks. Why do you ask? And who recommended him? A friend. She seemed confused by the questions. Ethan, does that matter right now? Dr. Fernandez approached, clearly uncomfortable with the turn the conversation was taking. Mr. Miller, we should focus on the child's situation. We all want what's best for her. All of us? Ethan repeated slowly. Interesting that you use that word, Doctor, because I have information suggesting you have very specific interests in this situation. The lawyer became visibly tense. I don't understand what you're implying. Robert stepped forward holding a folder. Dr. Fernandez, are you familiar with a company called Elite Domestic Services, owned by a Martha Sanchez? The ensuing silence was telling. Dr. Fernandez opened and closed his mouth several times before answering. I don't see the relevance of that question. The relevance, Ethan said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge, is that this company exploited Carmen Garcia and dozens of other women, and according to our documents, you are the attorney responsible for legalizing those fraudulent contracts. Patricia looked at Dr. Fernandez with growing shock. What are they talking about? These are baseless accusations, the lawyer replied quickly. A desperate attempt to distract from the irregular situation with the child. Robert opened the folder and began to read. Lease agreement for an employee room, monthly rent of $800 for a 669-foot space, no private bathroom. Special clause, personal documents to be held as collateral. Attorney of record, Dr. Fernandez. That's a distorted interpretation. Another document, Robert continued relentlessly. Domestic work agreement. Salary below minimum wage, justified by housing provided. No official employment records. Attorney, Dr. Fernandez. Patricia was growing pale. Fernandez, is this true? Patricia, don't let them... One more. Robert didn't stop. Authorization for retention of personal documents as guarantee of contractual compliance. Signed by women who could barely read. Attorney, Dr. Fernandez. Ethan stepped closer to the lawyer. How many women, Doctor? How many Carmen Garcias did you help destroy? I was providing legal services. Legal? Ethan's voice was laced with contempt. Is confiscating documents from vulnerable people legal? Is charging abusive rent for subhuman living spaces legal? Isabella, who had followed the entire conversation, let go of her mother's hand and approached Dr. Fernandez. Do you know Ms. Martha? The lawyer looked at the little girl, clearly uncomfortable. That has no relevance. Yes, you do, Isabella stated with her sharp perception. You helped her steal our papers. You helped her put my mom on the street. A child doesn't understand complex legal matters. I understand that you're mean, Isabella said with devastating simplicity. Like Ms. Martha, big people who hurt little people because they can. Patricia finally found her voice. Fernandez, answer me honestly. Were you involved in exploiting these women? The lawyer looked around, realizing he was cornered. Ms. Cole was watching everything with growing concern, and other hospital staff had stopped to watch the confrontation. Patricia, let's discuss this in private. No, she exploded. Answer me here, in front of everyone. Did you exploit vulnerable women? Doctor. Fernandez tried one last gambit. All contracts were signed voluntarily. If these women didn't understand the terms, that's not my fault. The answer was a confession. The silence that followed was broken by Carmen's weak voice from the hospital bed. Voluntarily, she whispered, struggling to be heard. When you have no choice, it's not voluntary. Ethan turned to Patricia. Now do you understand? You didn't just hire a lawyer. You allied yourself with someone who profits from human misery. And this same man is trying to use Isabella as a weapon against me. I didn't know, Patricia murmured. Clearly, shocked. "Of course you didn't know," Ethan exploded. "Because you never cared to know where the comfort in your life comes from. You never asked who cleans, who cooks, who takes care of the things you use." Dr. Fernandez tried to retreat discreetly, but Robert blocked him. "Doctor, we have enough evidence for a criminal complaint. I recommend you cooperate with us." "This is blackmail." "No," Ethan said calmly. "This is justice, something that should have happened a long time ago." Ms. Cole approached, clearly disturbed by the revelations. "Mr. Miller, this significantly changes my assessment of the situation. If there is evidence that the family was a victim of a criminal scheme." "There is abundant evidence," Robert confirmed. "And more importantly, there is evidence that Dr. Fernandez knew about Carmen Garcia's vulnerable situation and still maintained the exploitation." "That's speculation." "Is it?" Ethan turned to the lawyer. "Then explain how your client, my ex-wife, knew exactly where to find me today. How did she know I was at the hospital with Isabella?" Dr. Fernandez paled. "Go on," Ethan pressed. "Explain how you got here so quickly, with documents already prepared to question my mental capacity. As if you were expecting this situation to happen." "Ethan," Patricia whispered, "what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that your lawyer knew Carmen was sick. He knew she was my employee. And when he found out I was helping, he saw an opportunity to use it against me in the divorce." Robert opened another section of his folder. "Confirmed. Dr. Fernandez made calls to Mr. Miller's office this morning, asking about his whereabouts. He also contacted CPS before even coming to the hospital." "You planned this," Ethan accused. "You used the suffering of an orphaned child as a legal strategy." "Dr. Fernandez tried one, last defense. I was protecting my client's interests." "Liar!" Isabella's voice cut through the air. Everyone turned to her, surprised by the child's vehemence. "You were hurting people. Like all the mean adults I know. You promised to help, but you only want to hurt." Carmen, with a superhuman effort, managed to partially sit up in bed. "Isabella, come here." The girl ran to her mother, and Carmen hugged her with what little strength she had. "My daughter," Carmen whispered. "Not all adults are mean. Mr. Miller, he's different. He really wants to help." "How do you know, Mum?" "Because when he found me, he could have just called others to take care of it, but he came. Himself. He stayed here, taking care of you." Ethan felt tears burn his eyes as he heard Carmen's words. "And you know how else? I know he's good?" Carmen continued, her voice growing weaker. "Because when he found out about us, like, he didn't get angry. He got ashamed. Mean people get angry when they find out they've hurt someone. Good people get ashamed." Just then, a nurse ran into the ICU. "Dr. Stevens, come quick. The patient in bed 7 is having a severe respiratory crisis." Everyone looked at Carmen, who had closed her eyes and whose breathing was becoming labored again. "Everyone out!" Dr. Stevens yelled, rushing to Carmen's bed. "Now!" As they were pushed out of the ICU, Ethan heard Isabella scream, "Mom, don't leave me. I promise I'll be good. I promise I won't be any trouble." The ICU doors swung shut, leaving them in the hallway, where the medical alarms created a desperate symphony that echoed through the hospital corridors like a terrible omen. Isabella threw herself against the ICU door, pounding her small fists on the glass. As she screamed her mother's name, Ethan scooped her into his arms, feeling the little girl's body tremble with despair. "She's going to be okay," he whispered, more to himself than to Isabella. "She has to be." "She won't," Isabella cried hysterically. "Everyone I love leaves. Grandma, now Mommy, everyone abandons me." Ethan hugged the girl tighter, his own tears falling silently. At the end of the hall, Patricia watched the scene with a look of growing horror, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had helped cause. Dr. Fernandez tried to slip away, but Robert intercepted him. "Doctor, the police have been called. I recommend you remain here." Ms. Cole approached Ethan. "Mr. Miller, regardless of what happens with Carmen, I need to make a decision about Isabella. The revelations about Dr. Fernandez changed the situation, but there are still procedures to follow." "Ms. Cole," Ethan said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "if Carmen doesn't make it, Isabella cannot go to an orphanage. Not after everything she's been through. I understand your concern, but— One moment, a firm voice interrupted. It was Dr. Stevens stepping out of the ICU with a tired but not desperate expression. Everyone turned to him anxiously. "Carmen is stable," he announced. "It was a severe crisis, but we reversed it. Her heart responded better than we expected." Isabella stopped crying instantly. "She's not going to die." "Not today," Dr. Stevens answered carefully. "But you need to understand your mum will need constant care. Her heart is very weak and there could be other crises." "Can I see her?" "In a few minutes. She's asking for you." Ethan felt immense relief, but he knew there was still much to resolve. Carmen was alive, but her condition remained critical. Patricia approached hesitantly. "Ethan, I need to apologize." He looked at her coldly. "An apology won't undo what happened." "I know. But I need you to know that I had no idea about Fernandez's involvement with those horrible things." She looked at Isabella. "A child almost lost her mother because of my revenge. That's unforgivable." Dr. Fernandez tried to defend himself. "Patricia, you're letting emotion get the better of you. They're manipulating the situation." "Shut up," she exploded. "You used me. You used my divorce to cover up your crimes." At that moment, 2 police officers arrived in the hallway, accompanied by Robert. "Dr. Fernandez," one of the officers said, "you need to come with us to give a statement regarding the company Elite Domestic Services. This is absurd. I have rights." "You do," the officer agreed, "including the right to remain silent." As Dr. Fernandez was led away, protesting, Ethan focused on what really mattered. "Ms. Cole," he said, "I want to immediately begin the process of adopting Isabella. Whether she's an orphan or not, I want to be her legal guardian." "Mr. Miller, there are still issues to resolve." "Then let's resolve them. Robert, I want you to hire the best family law team there is. I want them to do everything by the book, but as quickly as possible." "I'm on it, Mr. Miller." Ms. Cole hesitated. "Even if you expedite everything, it will still take weeks. And in the meantime, Isabella will need to stay with a temporary foster family." "No," a weak voice said from behind them. Everyone turned. Carmen had managed to get out of bed, supported by 2 nurses, and was slowly walking toward them. She was pale and weak, but determined. "Mom!" Isabella ran to her. "Carmen, you should be resting," Dr. Stevens protested. "I need to solve this," she said with difficulty. "Ms. Cole, I want to give full power of attorney to Mr. Miller for everything related to Isabella." "Carmen, that requires legal documentation." "Then make the documentation," Carmen insisted. "Today. Now." Robert stepped forward. "I can have a family law specialist here in 2 hours." "Mrs. Garcia," Ms. Cole said gently, "are you sure about this? It's a very important decision." Carmen looked at Ethan, then at Isabella, who was clinging to her as if to stop her from disappearing. "I'm sure," she said firmly. "Mr. Miller didn't abandon us when everyone else did. He won't abandon us now." Ethan knelt beside Carmen and Isabella. "Carmen, I promise you that Isabella will always have everything she needs. Education, love, opportunities, everything." "I know," she smiled faintly, "and I promise I will fight to stay as long as possible, to see my girl grow up." "You will see her grow up," Ethan said with conviction. "We'll find the best doctors, the best treatments. If she needs a transplant, we'll get one. If she needs special care, she'll have it." Patricia stepped forward. "Ethan, I want to help." He looked at her, surprised. "Not to redeem myself," she continued. "There's no fixing what I did, but I want to help Carmen and Isabella. I can pay for the best medical treatments. I can ensure she has access to the best hospitals in the country." "Why would you do that?" "Because a child almost became an orphan because of me. And if I can't undo that, I can at least try to make amends." Carmen looked at Patricia with curiosity. "Thank you," she said simply. 6 months later, Ethan was sitting in the garden of his home, watching Isabella play with other kids at a birthday party. It was her 7th birthday, and the difference was like night and day. The girl he had met on the street, thin and desperate, had transformed into a radiant child. Her hair shone, her cheeks had color, and most importantly, she laughed. She laughed with the carefree joy that every child deserved. Carmen was sitting in a wheelchair beside him, still frail but stable. The heart transplant 3 months prior had been a success, and though she still needed constant care, the doctors were optimistic about her recovery. "She's happy," Carmen observed, watching her daughter play. "Very happy," Ethan agreed. "And you?" Carmen smiled. "Happier than I ever thought possible. When I was in that tarp shelter, I thought we were going to die there. I never imagined we could have a life like this." The lawsuit against Martha Sanchez and her exploitation network had resulted in the liberation of more than 40 women in situations similar to Carmen's. Dr. Fernandez was sentenced to 5 years in prison for racketeering and labor trafficking. Patricia had kept her promise. She not only paid for Carmen's medical treatment, but also established a fund to help other women victimized by the scheme. A divorce was finalized amicably, with Ethan keeping his company and Patricia taking other properties. "Mr. Miller," Isabella ran up to him, breathless from playing. "Can I show my new drawing to my friends?" "Of course, sweetie." Isabella had revealed herself to be not just intelligent, but artistically gifted. Her drawings decorated the entire house, and Ethan had hired a private art tutor to develop her talent. As Isabella proudly showed her drawings to her friends, Ethan reflected on how his life had changed. The company was still thriving, but he now worked with a different purpose. A portion of the profits went to social assistance programs, and he personally monitored the well-being of all his employees. "Ethan," Carmen got his attention. "Thank you." "For what?" "For teaching us that not all adults are bad. For showing Isabella that she can trust the world again." Ethan took Carmen's hand. "Thank you for teaching me that true wealth has nothing to do with money." Just then, Isabella came running back, followed by her friends. "Dad," she said naturally, the word she had started using a few weeks ago, "can Mom tell the story of the princess who lived in a tarp house?" Ethan smiled. Carmen had transformed her traumatic experience into a series of stories where a brave princess fought dragons and wicked witches until she found her true family. "Of course she can," he replied, watching Carmen prepare for another storytelling session. As the children sat in a circle around Carmen, Ethan watched the scene with profound gratitude. That rainy night, 6 months ago, when he had almost run over a desperate child, had been the most important moment of his life. Not because he had saved Carmen and Isabella, but because they had saved him. Saved him from an empty life, from superficial relationships, from an existence without real purpose. They had given him something all his money could never buy, a real family, built not on blood, but on love, loyalty, and mutual care. "Once upon a time," Carmen began the story, her voice clear and strong, "there was a little princess who lost her castle but never lost her courage." Ethan closed his eyes and smiled, knowing this was just one of thousands of stories they would still have time to build together. Real stories made of small everyday moments of care, of unconditional love. Stories of a family born from suffering, but which had chosen hope. And when Isabella looked at him and smiled, that radiant smile of a child who finally felt safe and loved, Ethan knew he had found his true wealth. It wasn't in bank accounts, properties, or multi-million-dollar contracts. It was right there, in that sunny garden where a brave woman told stories of princesses to children who believed in happy endings, while a man who had learned to see beyond himself watched with infinite gratitude the family that fate had placed in his path on a rainy March night. The end.